Absolute pleasure today to have Emma on the podcast. So thank you very much, aka ESG Fitness from the world of Instagram, as most people tend to know people from their Instagram URLs. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Now, for anyone who doesn't know anything about you initially, Emma, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from?
I'm Emma, or ESG Fitness. I am primarily an online personal trainer, run, I guess, quite a similar business to yourself with a slightly different niche, I think. Or from what I've seen, mostly men getting absolutely shredded. Mine's mostly women getting into shape, understanding a bit more about nutrition. Again, similar to you, I really focus on the educational side so that people understand the process. And I guess like in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Awesome. And whereabouts are you based?
I am, strangely, people are always surprised by this, based in Dundee. And every time I say that, people are like, why? And I'm like, it's actually really nice here.
I thought I had to drop that in. I knew the answer, but I thought people might find that interesting because your accent doesn't reflect where you live. So,
yeah, well, that is true. I have been.
Whether that's good or bad, I don't know.
Have you been to Dundee?
I haven't, but I do like the Scottish accent, but it depends.
Yeah.
Where it's like Glaswegian, however you pronounce it, it's a bit full on.
What, Dundee is quite full on. So you might struggle to understand people from here.
Cool. So we're going to go through some topics today. Obviously, Emma has a very strong client base of females, and specialises quite heavily in that base, which is why part of the reason I wanted to discuss today with you is one of the points was why men need to train like women and why women need to train like men. And part of the reason sort of brought this to mind, I had the pleasure of training one of my clients who's prepping for a photo shoot in December, Holly, yesterday. And first session in working with her one-to-one, and instantly her strength increased on doing a rack pull from what she did previously by about 40%. And for me, again, it was just the lack of confidence that perhaps she had to push herself with that ability, when maybe having someone there to reassure her that technique was okay and it's okay to crank it up a bit more. And she could have gone for more in the tank, but I think it's sometimes being sensible of how much you try and increase a load between workout to workout. 40% is quite a jump. So I think it's being sensible with that. But is that something you come across quite a lot?
I think it's a really interesting statement. So I'm interested to discuss it. And I guess what you really mean by women should train like men should train like women. I think obviously we're completely stereotyping people here. There will be women that train way harder than men, and there'll be men that train way harder than women.
Say that I think a lot of women train harder than men.
Yeah.
Women have a higher pain threshold than men when they know how to push themselves. They have the ability to push themselves further than men, I think.
Yeah, and I often think physiologically they kind of do as well. They've got slightly different physiology in terms of fiber types, in terms of their ability to recover. I definitely think women can train more frequently and recover quicker than men. Now, there's going to be a physiological aspect to that, but I will have to be totally honest. One of the reasons I think that that's the case is because women maybe not even tend to train not as heavy as men.
Yeah, I agree.
And potentially not as hard sometimes, or not to failure, which means they're not really stimulating the muscle in the same way. And I think it can be quite hard for a woman to load a certain exercise heavy enough for them to need 3 or 4 days of recovery before they train that muscle group again. Whereas for men, I think that can happen quite often. So I don't know if you, when you're programming, do you accommodate that? Do you say,
I take into account a lot of the recovery is such a person dependent variable, because it depends on a lot of people's lifestyle factors, and as you said, the ability for the individual to push themselves. And something I've noticed with my own training, I always find it interesting just to monitor how you progress when you look back, because the stronger that I personally have got, the more recovery demand it's put on my body, the more I can't go and deadlift anymore and max myself out of that, because I can't really train for 4 to 5 days because I just feel like I've been hit by a bus. So it's being wary of your own recovery abilities and what the end goal is. So using deadlift as an example, is an exercise I love. It's probably biomechanically what I'm strongest suited to do. However, it's not in line with my goals of trying to build a better physique, because if I go and do a deadlift session, I can't really train properly, say my legs or anything really, for 4 to 5 days of a major muscle group. So it has more of a negative effect than a positive effect, which I think when you, again, is coming back to women, I think because physiologically the loading of the muscles is slightly less, the damage isn't quite as severe, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, and I think like that brings up another point, that this is one of the things that I think is quite hard with online coaching, is that if I tell one of my clients to go max out on whatever it is, squats.
It's what they think is max out, isn't it?
Yeah, like some clients would be ruined for a week. Some clients would be ready to go again after 2 minutes in the gym. Like one person's maximal is completely different to another's. And I think that one comes a bit with training age and your experience, but also like you're saying, when you get to actually meet a client and they think, oh, that was my max, and you're like, no, it wasn't. Like,
you can see.
Yeah, try again. That's not quite. So yeah, I think people's perception of like what would be, even if you're using things like RPE scale, like what actually is a 10, and for one person a 10 is going to be like just marginally out of breath, and for someone else it's like, oh well, I would literally be dead.
Yeah, passed out on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. So that's quite interesting. I actually spoke about that a little bit yesterday with talking about high intensity interval training, and I had actually overheard a personal trainer in the gym kind of trying to implement HIIT in the way that they do it sort of in research. So, you know, usually they're using a bike where you're already going at speed and then the weight drops onto the bike. So have you ever done a Wingate cycle test?
Yeah, so I tend to like go through, I was doing that for a while. A bit of an issue, my blood pressure was like a bit high, so I was trying to use HIIT to bring it down, which did work. And that's essentially what I was doing, was trying to like get a bike up to speed and then crank the loading on it, just doing like intervals of that, which is horrendous.
Which is like a really hard thing to do if you've not got the special bike that like drops the weight.
What bike is a decent bike?
Yeah, you've got to get up to speed. So I think if you're trying to do really short, intense bouts for general population who maybe unless you're there telling them how hard you want them to go, like I was explaining that, you know, a session of 3 30-second sprints, like Wingate cycle sprints, even with 20 minutes recovery, like you would be absolutely dead. So it's that kind of level of intensity.
I have to say, like going down the line of HIIT, I have to say that's something, and people's ability to push themselves. Like for me, that's not something I would really use in a dieting phase, because I know, like hand on heart, that I can't push myself to do that because it's not something I necessarily enjoy. And I'll end up, like if I'm dieting and I'm tired, I'll end up going 80% rather than 100%. So it's almost, what's the point? You end up doing medium intensity cardio for a very short period of time. So it's not.
Yeah, and it's like, not only is it physically really fatiguing, but it's actually mentally really fatiguing.
Mentally it annihilates you.
So that's interesting. And then I think like kind of what we were discussing, like what you can recover from, but it brings up the question of like volume versus intensity when it comes to, volume versus like frequency when it comes to training. And I don't know what your, like if muscle mass is the sole goal, and obviously we know from research that volume is the key there, but I think frequency of training is also really important. So if you're stimulating that muscle more frequently.
I agree. And I'm a big fan of more probably for smaller body parts, higher frequency training. But I think the analogy of training one body, like if you're only, say for example, you're doing a traditional bro split that most people do, where you're training a body part once a week. Whereas if you're doing like a push-pull leg split, we train everything 5 days a week. Over a month, then you're going to get in an extra 4 sessions, I think, on each body part, which accumulate that over a year. That's a huge amount of extra opportunities where you can break down a muscle, get it to repair, break down a muscle, get it to repair. And it's another window of opportunity for your body to try and adapt and improve rather than just once a week. Your body doesn't know what day of the week it is and doesn't stick by a calendar. So it doesn't really make any difference in that respect. I think people, I can understand why people get to that doing set body parts on certain days, because it fits into people's schedules with work and life. And again, it all comes down to sustainability and consistency, but I would agree frequency.
And I think you'll probably get this like from more of like a bro stance. Like it is kind of fun to do like 10 exercises on chest and just like not be able to touch your face. But the thing is, you probably saturated your muscles response to that exercise at about like 4 exercises in. And the rest is just like, oh yeah, but having a pump is fun. And actually getting that fatigue just like you kind of feel like you've done more, but if your muscle could recover further from that, is probably not the case. Like I think we forget about, it's not just the training that we do, but we have to recover from that training.
Agree. And I think that's sometimes where it comes a little bit of training experience for the individual. Like you could be the greatest trainer in the world, but if you can't tell how that client feels inside their body. Like I did when I was doing legs the other day, I was going to do 3 sets of barbell squats at the end of doing legs. Seemed like a great idea. And like I did 1 set and it was just wiped out. And I was like, I could do another 2 sets, but I was like, it gets to the point where you're digging such a big hole for yourself that you can't get yourself out of it in terms of recovery by the time you next want to train. And then it comes back to like what we mentioned earlier in terms of what's the end goal, and is this actually going to be productive, or are you just like creating so much muscle damage that the recovery like demand is going to be so big that you almost can't recover from it.
And that's interesting as well. Like I think, so do you do the sessions that you program normally?
What, for clients, or do I do it?
Not
basically I like to guinea pig everything myself. So
yeah,
it's one of those things you can look at a workout on paper and I'm like, that looks like a piece of piss. And then when you actually, the intensity and how difficult a workout is in the execution of the workout rather than what it says on paper in terms of rep sets and the scheme of the whole thing. And I do everything any of my clients do myself first, because I want to try and see if it works and see how it feels. Every workout for me is an opportunity to like learn your body and how you feel and how you move. So I like try and be quite in tune with that. But it's, again, I think you have to be very intuitive sometimes with when enough is enough. So like my clients will say like do 3 or 4 sets. If you're done after 3, and I'd rather you did 3 like balls out sets than 4 that were 75%, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Quality of
and I think so much of it is the intensity. And I remember when I used to do athletics, I was always a bit like, I think our coach used to like share our sessions with like whatever, just anyone that wanted to know. And I was always a bit like, well, I don't want them knowing what I'm doing. Like that's like secret like training, but it's not really, it's the intensity that you put into that session. And you know what? None of them were particularly like, I'm not scared of showing my workouts, but if you don't do them with the right intensity, you wouldn't get the results anyway.
Like you must get this. One of my favorite comments to my hands, like head drops to my hands, is the workout's too easy. And I'm like, and I know when I've done it myself. And I was like, I remember when I was like dying on the floor after doing that session. I was like, you just like, your interpretation of how to push yourself doing it wasn't correct, essentially.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, even if you gave me a session that was like 3 sets of 10 on like 4 different exercises, that could ruin me. Oh, if I actually lifted heavy weights.
You do 1 set of 10 on something, and if you had someone there to literally like not let you out until you did 10 of like the physical maximum you could do, you wouldn't be able to walk.
Yeah. Interesting. What else did we want to speak about? Seasonal.
So the other thing I thought was quite a poignant topic to go through is like seasonal depression and the changes in seasons in terms of how you feel. Like I personally notice this every year. I come into now like autumn, it's darker in the mornings, and like normally like in the springtime, like it's light at 4:30, I'm up, I'm like ready to like take on the world. But now it's like a bit darker in the morning. Personally, I find it a bit of a drag trying to get myself out, being honest to people. And I hear a lot of the same things from my clients, which is why I think it's quite a good topic to open up and maybe like discuss, because a lot of people sometimes think that it's just them who feel like this, whereas I think it's maybe something that's not discussed openly very often.
Yeah, and I also think it's good to be aware of, because a lot of people might just be like, oh, I've been feeling really low, I don't know what it is. And then you're like, well, actually, it could be that it's darker in the mornings. Like people do tend to get, I definitely feel it. Like it's harder to get up in the morning when it's dark.
It's cold and dark, particularly in Dundee.
Yes, particularly here. And the blooming, it hasn't even changed yet, like the daylight savings. So it's about to get even worse. Have you ever used, there's like special lights that you can get?
No, this is quite funny. So I bought, being the idiot that I am, as soon as I get an idea like this, I was like, I'll just buy the best one of whatever it is. So I bought this alarm clock that's basically like replicates the sun to wake you up. And when I bought it, to be fair, I was working like full time. I used to manage branch and estate agents. This was like the start of the year. and it was the most irritating thing in the world. So like, say for example, you want to get up at like 5:45, it would start lighting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, but like really gradually. And probably because I get affected by seasons so heavily, I'm really sensitive to light when I sleep, to the point that I have to wear all these weird face masks now, don't ask. My wife's not impressed. And like, as soon as it lights up, I'm awake. So I'll be awake at 5 o'clock. If you've got a partner, it wakes her up as well. So if you've got to get up at like, before then, it doesn't work. So it's a bit of a nightmare. So it's like 200 quid clock that's been used about 3 times.
So basically you bought a 200 quid clock and then started wearing an eye mask so you couldn't see it?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't.
Nice.
The clock is now sat next to my bed, but just unplugged, and it looks quite nice, to be fair.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, do you have any good like tips to get over the fact that, you know, some people get a little bit low during this time of year?
I think supplementing with vitamin D is a big one. Because we naturally, living in the northern hemisphere in the UK, is not particularly sunny anyway. We don't get a lot of natural light exposure. So I think that does have a big influence. And I think a lot of people, when they find if they get their blood work done, they can see that they can be deficient in a lot of vitamins that they're taking in because they're not getting enough vitamin D. There is, I think is it the red lights you can get? The infrared lights you can get, which are supposed to like zap you with that, I think, with like natural light, but that's a bit full on biohacking for me. And I think in real terms, get someone to sit in front of a light for 5 minutes a day, I think it's a little bit where do you call the line with some of these things. I think supplementing with like a tablet a day or whatever isn't an issue, but if you're asking people to go out their way to try and sit in front of a light to give them some natural light exposure, I think it's probably a bit full on.
Yeah, and I think like vitamin D is one of the more, I guess we know that from research that almost everyone in the UK is deficient in vitamin D. So I guess supplementing that is a good way to go. And I think it does, like, in an ideal world, you'd get it from sunlight. And I think it's much more easy for your body to take that in and actually utilize it than, I'm sure there was some research showing that supplementing wasn't like as beneficial, obviously, but it's like what we've got and what's readily available, and kind of what you're saying, like it fits into people's lives. It's quite an easy add-on.
I think it's the same thing. I think you must find with your clients as well, like, and I find with my own life, there's what's optimal and then there's what's practical. Like, some things just aren't practical to be done. And so that's where we talk about studies and research, is like some things might say like a certain diet or training system is optimal, but you can't go, like, a lot of people can't train, like, say if they said train 5 times a day, people can't do that, for example. So it's trying to find what fits in with the Western lifestyle optimally. Yeah,
and what people can stick to is, I guess, the most obvious one in fitness I see is, you should be, if you wanted to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis as often as possible, that would be like every 2 hours. So you'd eat like 25 grams of protein every 2 hours. It's not practical for anyone to do that.
I think that again is one which a lot of people can get a bit too hung up on, like, I haven't eaten within 2 hours. Like, in my opinion, like, ideally I'd try and get clients to eat probably every 3 hours if possible, have like a snack or something, just because I think it tends to prevent overeating when they do go and eat. But like, if that rolls onto 4 hours or whatever, like, I wouldn't be bothered. It's not going to make any difference at all.
This is where I think, like, we have, I guess, different opinions, but only, I think, because of our general client base. Yeah, because I think that works really well for men. And I'm going to say, all I mean by men is bigger people who have a bit more calories to play with. Because if you took one of my standard female clients who's maybe dieting on 1,500 calories, and you split her meals up into every 3 hours, so say like 5-6 meals a day, they're so small that she's never full, but yet always, and you have to use a lot of willpower to, at the end of that very small meal, stop eating. And you've done it so many times a day. And it does work really well for like people on higher calories, but on lower calories, I tend to find that even things like intermittent fasting work a hell of a lot better, because you can have big satiating meals, just less of them.
And spread them out.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic to talk about males compared to females again, because I found I've got a podcast that went live today with Matt O'Reilly and Emily King, who are from from Australia who are WBFF pros who compete in like 3-4 days. And they're a couple both prepping, competing together. They've done a few times. It's obviously an interesting challenge. But it's interesting because Matt, obviously is a big guy, he's like 100 plus kilos. He literally suffers really badly being with hunger and like can't go without eating. Whereas like Emily, for example, doesn't have the same issue, being a slightly smaller female. Like I think men just generally suffer more, I think, from hunger, maybe from having a larger frame and more maybe demands for muscle mass. I don't know if that's more like I'm not quite sure what drives. I guess it's just physiological influence.
Well, it's interesting because obviously I more hear this from like the other side. They're like, oh, my boyfriend's complaining that he's dieting on like 2,500 calories when I've never eaten that much in my life. Like that's like, that would be me like bulking and then some. But the point you're making is totally valid. Like there's your drive to hunger would be bigger because you might still be in the same magnitude of deficit or even a potentially bigger deficit. You're a bigger human. Your basal metabolic rate will be bigger. Your demand for calories is higher.
And you also think the training demand, like we were talking about earlier, in terms of like the intensity of the training, if the loading is a lot higher, probably the physiological demand in terms of your body craving nutrients from that in terms of response is probably going to be a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I guess I hear it again from the other side of like with more flexible dieting or people that are taking that approach, it'd be, like you could quite easily, even like a couple of days before a shoot, go out for Nando's or like, take your girlfriend or your wife out for dinner. Whereas as a female, that's like potentially half my calorie allowance for the day. Yeah. Whereas for you, you're like, yeah, that's maybe like 1.5 of the 6 meals I would have had. Like I'll have to make some slight adjustments. But like for a girl, sometimes like a meal out, given that portion sizes don't change if you're male or female, like it's just sort of standard. And I know you don't have to eat anything. Like
if it's on the plate that's getting eaten, let's be honest.
Like realistically, you've paid for it. It's on the plate. It's getting eaten. So yeah, I guess it's just like considerations for different demographics.
No, I'd agree with that 100%. I think it's just an interesting comparison. I think women get a bit of a raw end of the deal with that. I think just because their body weight is so much less, and like even for me, like part of the reason I've always wanted to carry more muscle mass, being naturally greedy in terms of food, is that I know I can get away with eating more. And like the biggest guys will always have to eat the most food. So if you're a particularly tall chap, I had another guy on the podcast today, he's like 6'5" or something. So like some of these guys have to take in huge amounts of food just to stay alive, like let alone actually train or try and do anything. So it's amazing how much food some people take, and even some people take, like for men trying to gain weight. And I know like some women would probably never believe this, and I haven't spent a long time doing that, but it gets to the point where I was like eating about 5,500, 6,000 calories a day about this time last year, and it gets to the point where you're like, I don't want to look at any more food. Like you start trying to eat that much every day, it gets a lot.
I've worked with guys that have sort of said the same, and you're always kind of like, oh God, I wish I had that problem. But I don't imagine it's very fun, to be honest.
It's fun for like the first few weeks, and then you get to the point of like, fuck this, like you just fucking, you feel like bloated all the time.
I think the first few weeks is probably because I imagine you start from a fairly lean place.
Yes, your body's just craving food.
Yeah, and your hunger probably hasn't caught up with, or your hunger's still there. And then like once your body realizes this is how much food we get every day, it's like, well, you don't need hunger anymore. Like turn that off, whatever. So I guess it would be hard. And I think a lot of people try and do it eating the same foods that they were dieting on, just more of it. And I'm like, there's no way you can get in 5,000 calories eating chicken and rice, because like even just the food volume side, like you can't.
And that's why I'm quite a big fan of particularly like, say, intra-workout carbohydrates, because that's quite an easy way to get extra carbs in, using things like, I would always prefer whole food is king, but when you get to the point where you're eating 5,000-6,000 calories a day, it makes it a lot easier if you have like 2 meals with the protein sources, like a whey isolate or something like that. It's easy to digest. It's not going to bloat you out. So it's, again, be very aware of what digests well with you. And like, I remember one of the most stupid things I ever did. Last time I competed, I was going to have a high carb day with 1,000 grams of carbs. And it was at that point when I was literally like dying. I was so hungry and I couldn't wait for this day. And the first meal I was like, what's the most filling thing I can have? So I had like 200 grams of oats. And bear in mind, I was like 3 weeks out from a show and I was like shredded. literally I've never been so bloated after about like 2-3 meals after that started to digest. And again, it's just being aware of what digests well with you and not like overdoing it on certain food groups.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's a completely different world as well. Like when you're competing for a show and you've got to really get in tune with more so like how your body reacts to certain foods. It is an interesting process, you know, finding like what did you find was good for you like pre-show?
Digestively, anything I find works really well for me is anything that's rice based. So rice cakes, white rice. I'm a big fan of using like ground rice mixed with like whey isolate, again, because it's just super easy to eat. It just doesn't bloat me out at all. Whereas I find if I was to eat, like I love porridge oats, but I can't, as soon as I start to have a lot of it, it just fills me out way too much. But personally, like carbs, I don't find I have any issues digesting. For me, it's fats tend to cause a lot of issues. So if I start trying to add a lot of fats to meal, like fats with carbs, it tends to slow digestion down. So like say, for example, today I'm having a high carb day, like 500 grams of carbs, but I'll keep the fats relatively low, like 65 grams. And 20 grams, that will be from like fish oils. So there's not a huge amount of added fats at all. It's just natural sources really. Because I find if I have any added fats within the meals, my digestion slows down so much from trying to break the fats down essentially.
That is interesting. So do you carb cycle like habitually?
I always do to a degree, because I think logically it makes sense in the fact that if you're like, I have a rest day diet and a training day diet. So on a rest day, I'll have if I was looking to get leaner, I'd probably go pretty much like 10 grams of carbs or 0 grams of carbs. I'd have some berries, which are like low glycemic index anyway. And then on my training days, I would push the carbs heavier around like training. So I'd have around 300 grams of carbs maybe on a training day, which would probably be split around the workout, like pre-workout, post-workout. But at the moment, as I'm trying to push my weight up a little bit, I've been having a high carb day once a week, which is normally the day before like a weaker body part, just to almost try and like oversaturate glycogen for when I go and train, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Again, trying to like, I quite like the logical principle of thinking like fuel your body when it needs it, if that makes sense. I don't know, I can appreciate if you're very low carbs anyway, having 100 grams of carbs an hour before you train, that's not going to be in your muscle cells by that point. But
well, I don't know, like
part of it will, but I think a lot of it's psychological as well.
Yeah, I think some of it is psychological, and I can see the benefit to it. And I actually, for some clients, like carb cycling, but it's more calorie cycling.
Yeah. But that's the thing, you create a natural calorie cycle by doing that, because you've such a drop off of carbs. I increase the fats and protein a little bit, but I do the same with my clients, and it's generally what I find tends to work best with people. I don't know if you find, I find mentally, I feel better eating less carbohydrates than when I eat like, if I'm eating tons of carbs, I just want to sleep, or I feel out of it, like just can't really concentrate.
I normally just eat low carb all the time. Yeah. I find that, I'm way more focused. I find it really easy. I don't really count calories because I'm just sort of like at like a maintenance phase. Like I'm not looking to do anything in particular. And I find that's a really easy way to basically eat to my maintenance needs without having to track on MyFitnessPal, which is never something I've enjoyed doing. So I think for some people it can work really well, but I think there always needs to be the knowledge that like carbs aren't bad. You can have them if you want. It's just a tool that you could use, you know.
That's a big take home point. I think a lot of people are very scared of certain food groups. It's like, you should never eliminate one entire food group. Like you need to have protein, fats, carbohydrates. You can't just go like get rid of fats completely, because hormonally it causes a shitstorm. And like, although there's a lot of research to say for like overall health, which I probably agree with, like a ketogenic diet is probably the most healthy diet you can have within reason. But I think in practical terms, that again isn't going to happen, because nearly like most of the foods we have now have carbohydrates with them. And I think a lot of people, if you said to me, you can never eat carbohydrate again, would probably very much struggle. Yeah. That'd be like my worst nightmare.
It's very unrealistic, and I actually don't think ketogenic diets are healthy. I think that they limit way too much like quote unquote good food. So if you're on a ketogenic diet, you can't really eat that much fruit. You can't eat
It's very
that much
difficult.
veg. You can't have any whole grains. Like, and all these things have been like independently shown to improve your health on various markers, including like overall mortality. So I don't think limiting in that, like, to that extreme. But the thing is, what tends to happen in research, you're like, oh, this is really interesting, and then it's like, actually, moderation is probably going to be the answer.
That's what always said the answer to everything.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's not exciting. Like, people like extremes,
Yeah,
and
exactly. I was gonna say.
you know what? It's kind of easier to stick to something like a really low carb diet or like a ketogenic diet, because, and I read this quote yesterday actually, and it resonated with me so much. And it said 98% is harder than 100% in terms of commitment. So let's say you've fully committed to a ketogenic diet. That means you just don't eat
It's that
carbohydrates.
all or nothing thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, like, the point with that is that you made that choice once. So you're saying, I'm going to go on a ketogenic diet. I make that choice once. I don't make that choice now every time I eat something. I don't even think, like, I'm just hypothetically doing this. I am not on a ketogenic diet,
It's what you do.
but
It's not a choice.
but you don't have to make that choice for every meal. And for me, I was thinking, oh, that's one of the reasons probably why vegans and vegetarians are so good at sticking to their diet. Do you think a vegetarian every single meal makes the choice to be a vegetarian? They don't. They made that choice potentially years ago, and they don't have to make it again and again. That means it's not like using up their willpower. It's just a one choice they've gone 100% in. And that's a good example. Like, I think it'd be way harder to be 98% vegetarian, and now and again when you feel like it, have a little bit of something, then just be like, no, I'm 100% vegetarian. I don't eat animal products. Done. I'd never have to make that decision again.
I 100% agree with that. That's you just don't have to think about it then. It's the same thing for me. I would enjoy it, but I would never go, like, I go into the petrol station. I look at the chocolate, but I don't really look at it. Like, I would never think about picking up a chocolate bar and buying it. Like, that would just never even like cross into my brain. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
It's like when, before, I don't know, like when a sort of behavior turns into a habit, isn't it?
yeah,
You don't have to make those like conscious efforts.
you don't even have to think about that anymore.
Yeah.
You almost
I
can't.
guess like with you and with training as well, it's not like, oh, every day I have to force myself to do X, Y, or Z, or like to train. And you're like, no, I'm someone who exercises and enjoys the gym. It's not an effort to go.
You're saying that though. You know, we were saying about the seasonal depression thing. I actually found out yesterday I felt a bit off when I woke up, and I was going to go and train, and I was like, I made my pre-workout meal, and I was like, I don't feel right. I threw it in the bin. I didn't weight train. I went and just did some cardio and trained a client. Because I just didn't quite feel like it. I felt my body needed resting, which was for me a very, very unusual thing, because I'm like probably a chronic overtrainer, whereas like the last 2 months I've pretty much been like training a lot twice a day and going probably like overdoing it. It's probably that analogy of like too much of a good thing, where I've probably like mentally and physically overdone it a little bit, whereas I now probably need to go into like, I like to listen to my body and like my mind, how I feel with training, in terms of like, okay, maybe now I need to change my training cycle into like once a day, which I'm going to do, and scale back the volume a little bit, because that's probably a sign in terms of how you mentally and physically feel.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting, like someone like you know, if you were my client and you were like, I don't feel like training today, I'd be like, have a rest day.
Yeah.
Because I know that you are like a chronic overtrainer, and it actually, you're listening to your body, it probably does need a rest. And then you get other clients that like any excuse not to get to the gym, and you're just like, just go, just do something.
And that again comes from you as a trainer, having the skill to interpret your client and the level of their ability and ambitions. Because if it's someone who's a beginner and they've only been doing it a week, you'd be like, you probably not in an arrogant way, but you probably haven't earned the right to be like, I can't be bothered to go today, because you haven't put in the mileage quite yet to be at that level where your body's probably needing a bit of a break anyway, or you're mentally needing a break, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that's good. Like DOMS is quite a good example there. Like if you've got a new client and they're like, oh, I'm really sore, I think I'll just take the day off the gym. And it's like, nah, just work through it, because this is purely because you've not been doing this exercise very often. You know, but if you had a client who maybe haven't changed their training that much, but they're like, oh, I suddenly just feel really sore all the time. You're like, that's probably a sign you're not recovering. Let's take a day off the gym, or let's take a couple of days off the gym. So I guess like knowing where they are in that journey as well.
Yeah,
helpful.
I 100% agree with that. And that's one thing I think people need to be like, and if my clients listening and if your clients listening, be very open and aware with the feedback that you provide to us, because that makes our lives a lot easier to make more informed decisions on what's the best action to take for you the following week. Because like all these little signs from your body will add up and make a difference in terms of what's the best like approach going forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, are you ready for?
You got some questions. So let's have.
Yeah. Okay. Just to
I have no
give the
idea what these are.
listeners an intro. Yesterday, I put. Oh yeah, these will be a surprise. So yesterday, I put something up on Instagram, and it was asking for fitness unpopular opinions. Okay. So I'll just fire them at you, and we can discuss.
Okay.
Okay. Or I don't really want to start with such a. Okay. Here's one which we've kind of touched on. Some of them are a little bit controversial, you know. Okay, first one isn't. So no pain, no gain. That came up twice.
Probably the most stupid saying I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd say is there's a difference between pain as in like someone stabbed you pain, and pain as in like you walked up 1,000 sets of stairs and your quads are burning. Like if your joints are hurting, you're getting pain, for example, in your knee, whatever you're doing, stop and like try and work out why or do another exercise.
I also think that some trainers are like, oh, you have to give it everything. And I guess we were sort of saying that at the start of the podcast, but when it comes to like someone
within the realm of form.
Or like, yeah, but even then, like I've got clients who don't really want to get that uncomfortable, but equally their goals are just improve body composition, being healthier, feeling good about themselves.
You don't have to kill yourself to do that, to be fair. It depends.
You don't need to be crying on the leg press.
No.
Like you can just like stimulate that muscle, you know, and work it, but it doesn't have to be, and that's what I kind of want to get across. It doesn't have to be painful, and it can be enjoyable, and you don't have to push your body to its absolute limits. Now, if you're someone who's motivated to do that and wants to do that, that's cool. But I think that, or seeing that, puts a lot of people off even like trying in the gym, because they're like, oh God, like that person was literally like crawling out the gym after a PT session. Like that's not what I want to be doing. It doesn't, depending on your goals, it does not have to be like that.
100%.
Okay, next one. Oh, now my phone's locked. Okay. Fat PTs won't be as successful.
Depends how clever they are with marketing themselves and how good they are at their job. Because ultimately, if they can market themselves and get client results, it doesn't matter what they look like within reason. But I'm a big advocate of leading by example. By the way you conduct and carry yourself will influence the success of your business, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, obviously, it doesn't really matter what you look like, as in you could give out the best information, offer the best support, and be massively overweight. But it does show for a fact that you're not practicing what you're preaching. So and I can sort of see why someone would be like, well, you're not able to stick to this, so why do you expect me to? And I think you do have to, like you're saying, lead by example. And as much as you like maybe this isn't the right way of things, like you are your own business card as a PT, really. Like, and I don't think, not for 1 second am I saying you have to be shredded all the time or be in amazing shape or look like incredible. My point is, I don't think you should be out of shape.
No, I agree. And I think it's like the analogy I like to use is like you wouldn't take financial advice of someone who's bankrupt. Like
exactly, yeah.
Think about it like that, you just wouldn't. So
yeah. Okay. Next one. Men do.
Sorry, you broke up then.
So this one is, men do care how much you can bench.
No, that's like retarded. I don't even know how much. I can't remember the last time I flat bench pressed. That for me.
My least favorite one is I can leg press. Blah blah blah. I'm like, oh, what can you squat though?
I don't even know. Like for me, I just don't really see the point of anything less than 5 reps unless you're a powerlifter.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if someone asks that question to me, then like I automatically know that they don't really know a lot about about training, in my opinion.
Okay, here's quite a good one. Taking steroids will make you get there quicker.
No, because that's the icing on the cake of like someone who's looking to push themselves to an elite level. However, if your training and nutrition isn't correct, then you're not really going to get going where you want to do. Like tons of people will end up doing steroids and won't make any progress at all because their diet will be well off. They won't be training like correctly. And if someone's training technique's not correct and they're not actually putting tension through the muscle, then you can take all the drugs in the world you like, but nothing's going to happen.
Well, okay, I'm going to disagree slightly.
That you can sustain.
Sorry, you broke up. What did you say there?
So there's nothing that you can sustain for a period of time.
Like, obviously it takes hard work. No one is not saying that. And I actually think often people that do take steroids work even harder because they're that much more committed. Like, you're not generally, or you'd hope that someone who's not that committed wouldn't even consider.
Yes, coasting on that.
Yeah, so I'm not saying it doesn't take hard work, but there are, one study in particular to show that even if you do nothing, you will grow muscle mass if you take steroids. So,
but again, I would take that with a pinch of salt on the, like, what the research group was of the study. Like, I think to a degree, yeah, you probably would add some muscle tissue because hormonally your body would be in a more of an anabolic state, which it's never been. So your testosterone levels would be super physiological. But like without the training stimulus, I can't really see other than increased like fluid retention within the muscle, why muscle hypertrophy would occur, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the study is interesting because it had 3 groups, and one group train and take steroids, and one group just take steroids and don't train. And unsurprisingly, the group that trained and took steroids built the most muscle mass. Then the group that did nothing but just took steroids, and then the group that trained. So there obviously is a huge anabolic effect of taking steroids, and you can see that, like, this isn't exactly the same, but you can see that in like certain animals that have higher testosterone levels, that they've got more muscle mass without, like, this is slightly different because like bulls have potentially myostatin inhibitors as well, which is another, like, a different mechanism. But have you ever seen a bull lifting weights?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, it's absolutely shredded. And some of it is to do with hormonal differences, some of it is to do with other things. But I think the question was like, would you get somewhere faster taking steroids? And the answer is probably yes. Like, it takes a hell of a lot of hard work as well to develop an amazing physique. Like, you can't just sit there, take steroids, and then become the next Mr. Olympia.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't work like that.
It will. There's no sort of denying that if you did it right, or quote unquote right, you would get more results.
There's it's not like there's no dispute about that. It's 100% proven in that aspect. It's guaranteed.
Yeah. But I do think you're right in that a lot of people are like, oh, like, I don't think, people are like, oh, it's cheating. Yeah. I'm like, actually, they didn't, like, or they'll look at someone with amazing physique and be like, yeah, but they take steroids, so none of their hard work means anything. And you're like, well, actually,
the chances are that the people who do that will push themselves, you said, harder than anyone else because they are so serious about what their end goal is.
Yeah, and I guess you've taken that commitment that that it's probably not great for your health, and you're probably that much more serious. Like, I know if I had already made the commitment to put my sort of health on the line, I'd be like, right, well, I should at least make the most out of this, and then like probably train harder. Plus, one of the things that I think steroids allow you to do is recover quicker, thus allow you to train harder.
Yeah, so it gives you the ability to push yourself further.
Yeah. Right, okay, will I pick one last one? What's your biggest fitness unpopular opinion?
Oh, in what respect?
It's so hard on the spot, isn't it?
Unpopular opinion. I don't think I've got any. I'm similar to you in terms of the keto diet. I think it's bullshit, and I just hate, like, it's just a marketing con. The other one that I get a little bit frustrated about at the moment, and I respect people who want to do it from an ethical point of view, is the big vegan plant-based movement, which again is becoming, in my opinion, a big marketing con where people are like, oh, look how much weight I've lost, look how jacked I am just eating plants. Whereas like, you look at like, say for example, the American guy, Mike Rashid, he was like a heavyweight boxer, like guy's jacked. He's like, oh yeah, I'm vegan. It's like, yeah, but you didn't build that physique.
Yeah.
Spinach, like, let's be serious.
But let's be honest, that's every supplement company, any athlete.
I agree, but it's that I find frustrating, because then I have people come to me who want to like take that approach, which is great, but they then have unrealistic expectations about what that will do for them. And like, in my opinion, why people tend to lose weight when they're on a vegan diet is not because they're eating plants, it's because they're just cutting out all the other shit that they were eating before, because they can't eat a lot of it anymore.
Yeah.
Same things you were saying about 100% or the 98%. Once you've made that choice, if you can stick to it for a little period of time, then you will end up losing weight.
Yeah, I think that's why rule-based dieting does tend to work so well. Although some people are like, oh, it's, you don't have to go vegan to do this. You don't have to cut out carbs to do that. But it's like, yeah, but it's one rule that people can just quite easily be like, well, that's me, made that decision, bam, I don't really need to think about anything else. Whereas flexible dieting can be a little bit too flexible for people. They're like, oh, I can eat anything. I just need to practice like basically portion control and self-control. And
I'm a bit like that as well. Like, as soon as I give myself a little bit of flexibility, I tend to start to take the piss a little bit, to be honest with you. So for me, I'd rather have a rigid diet where I just follow certain foods, rather than be like, oh yeah, let's try and get a Pop-Tart in here, there. And then like, things tend to slide a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I especially think that's true with people I've had that have done like prep. And I think you can do flexible dieting on prep. And I always promote like some aspect of flexibility, but especially as you get towards the end phases where you're tired, fatigued, where you're thinking a lot about food, you can end up spending like your whole day obsessing over whether you can fit a Pop-Tart in, or, what you might have within your macros for dinner. And it's like, do you know what? You need like that mental power is far better used in literally anything else. Like,
it's waste of time.
And family, friends, whatever. So it's like, maybe during that stage of prep, you would want something a bit more structured, like more of a meal plan based thing where you don't think anymore. You're just like, yeah, this is what I eat, done. I've got brain power for other things.
Yeah, robot mode.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know what opinion you're going to have on this one, but we'll finish with this. What's the point of wearing makeup to the gym? It's pointless. Yeah, I see loads of people do it.
If I haven't got an issue with people doing it, I think within reason. Like, you see some girls, you're like, Jesus Christ, like this, it's like a photo shoot. You're like, you're walking down a catwalk and then they're not really training. You're like, oh, I see you're probably lurking around trying to find guys here or something. But you must see it a lot. But I have no issue with people doing it. And I think like a small amount's not a problem, but I don't really, it's not I don't know, it's just the pressures of social media in the world. Like, everyone wants to look perfect all the time. So I haven't got an issue with anyone doing it.
I don't have an issue with it at all, actually. And like, even girls that want to just go to the gym and like,
that's what they do. They're not hurting anyone. It's their life. Do what you want.
I'm like, well, I'll do what I do. You do what you do. Like, it doesn't affect me or hurt me in any way. And actually, if wearing makeup makes them feel more confident and makes them feel like they can go to the gym or whatever, like, do what you want. And you know what? Sometimes you don't know as well. Like, maybe some girls just come back from work and she can't be bothered to take her makeup off. Like, it doesn't affect you, does it? So just sort of like, I'm just very much like each to their own. If it's not hurting anyone, then crack on.
I agree. All right, we'll start to wrap up the podcast there. So thank you so much for today, Emma. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure.
Some topics to discuss. So for anyone who doesn't know you, where can they find out some more information about you?
You can find me on Instagram at ESG Fitness or www.esgfitness.co.uk and Facebook and all the other places.
Awesome. So if anyone who's listening, I'm going to give away a free place in my next Shred and 8 program that starts 21st of October. So if you can just tag myself and Emma in one of your stories listening to the podcast, and I'll choose a winner the day after the podcast goes out. So absolute pleasure,
awesome.
Emma. So I hope you have a great day and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.